Perceived owner calculations have been in DGE for, well, since DGE started. And DGE, the calculation of perceived owner was always dependent on resource activity. So DGE collects security, but it also monitors activity, looking for file opens and security changes, things like that. And DGE would save that information in order to help calculate who perceived owners of resources should be. So if you have a share out there that people are using, DGE would calculate looking at who's been using it the most, who's been doing certain activities the most, and then suggest those individuals as perceived owners for those resources. So this is great. Like I said, we've had this in the product for a while. The only issue was that here I am, and what you're seeing here is DGE 7.2. In some cases, and in some instances, in a lot of cases, if resources have had no activity, then DGE was unable to calculate a perceived owner. So for example, you can see here, I have the finance share and the underlying folder as well, and the perceived owner is coming back as none. And the reason for that is because there is no activity collected, or at least there's no activity within the time frame that DGE looks for activity to calculate perceived owner. So logged into the web portal as a data governance administrator and trying to understand who should own the finance share, unfortunately, without the activity, I'm unable to see who that perceived owner could be. You know, for the most cases, you can see activity was actually showing some perceived owners, but for the ones that I'm really interested in here, this finance share, coming back as none. So this is how we've addressed this in DGE 7.1. So here I am logged into DGE 7.1 into the web portal, again as a data governance administrator. And now you can see for all of my resources, every single governed resource, we have perceived owners. The way we've accomplished this in DGE is, in addition to looking at resource activity, DGE will also look at the security on the resource. So looking at the access control lists and the groups that are part of that access control list, and doing recursive group expansion on those groups to actually find the people within those groups who actually have access. So we didn't get away with activity, or we didn't do away with activity. It is still the primary basis for calculating perceived owner, but in the absence of resource activity, or if the calculation of perceived owner using resource activity doesn't come back with enough perceived owners, then DGE will switch to using resource security. So you can see that here in the manager, and I'll just kind of run an example so you can see. I have this sister stuff folder, and on the sister stuff folder, here's the permissions. I have domain local mat sisters group. Within the domain local mat sisters group is a global group, and inside of that global group are both of my sisters, Pamela and Jennifer. So the sister stuff share and its underlying folder have actually had not any activity for quite some time. But in the absence of that activity, DGE is looking at the access control list. For example, you see domain admins and you see the domain local mat sisters group. So when I calculate perceived owner, DGE is going to look into the security, it's going to look at the groups, it's going to expand the users of the groups, and it's going to recommend accounts that are actually in the access control, right? So here you can see Jennifer and Pam, my sisters, are evenly perceived as owners of that resource. And the reason is because they're the only two people who are in that global security group, Matt's sisters. So this is how we've improved DGE's calculation of perceived owners. In the absence of activity, use resource security, because if somebody has access, then they may be the owner of the resource. But if they're not, then the individuals that we're recommending as perceived owners might know who those perceived owners should be. So that's one way we've improved the perceived owner calculation. The second way we've improved it is by not only looking at resource activity and resource security, but also looking at identity manager organizational structure, like management, right? So Pam and Jen within identity manager actually don't have managers assigned. So I'm going to go ahead to employees. I'm going to select my sisters, Pam and Jen. So there's Jen up there. There's Pam here. Change master data. We'll go to organizational, and I'm going to set their manager to be, let's set them to be this first person, a person, right? So both Pam and Jen will be sharing the same manager. We'll go save. Let's go back to data governance, managed hosts, and let's find that share again. There we are. There's the sister stuff share. Now let's calculate perceived owner. So now we have 3 perceived owners. We have Jen, we have Pam, and we have their manager. So we're returning not only people who currently have access, but we're also looking at those individuals, looking in identity manager at organizational structure, finding if there's any common managers of those people, and suggesting the managers as perceived owners. Again, it's DGE's way of looking at every possible avenue, all the information possible, so that a data governance administrator has more information to help them find the business owner. And the more information in this case is more people. More people means a better chance at finding who that perceived owner could be, right? So this is the improvements that we've made to perceived owner calculation in data governance. One quick thing to show you in the configuration file for Data Governance Edition for the service, you'll see there's a new key, a new setting where you can actually adjust some behavior of the calculation of perceived owner. The perceived ownership by resource activity, the value is true. This is the default value, which basically means DGE will look at resource activity as the primary source for calculating perceived owner. If you set this value to false, DGE will look at the resource security first and then fall back to resource activity if the resource security isn't giving enough information. So that's one of the ways that you can change the configuration of the algorithm, of the calculation. And the next thing to keep in mind is we have this perceived ownership max return value with the default value of 5. That means the most number of perceived owners in any calculation that will be returned is 5. If you change that to 10, then you'll have 10 maximum perceived owners returned. An additional benefit of the enhancements to perceived owner calculation are that in the past, DGE was limited to looking at resource activity, which indicates that DGE was limited by those platforms that supported activity. So Windows servers, local Windows servers, NetApp and EMC devices, and SharePoint were fine. But other platforms that were supported by DGE, like remote Windows or generic managed hosts, you know, some of the new platforms that we support, like NFS on EMC Isilon devices or cloud, where we're not necessarily getting resource activity, it's no longer a barrier to us to calculate perceived owner. Because we're using resource security as one of the criteria for the calculation, then we are able to calculate perceived owner for any platform that we support, right? So Windows computers, SharePoint Online, DFS, any of the NAS device formats, everything is supportable in terms of calculate perceived owner now. And there you go. That is the new perceived owner enhancements in DGE.